Welcome to the Train the Teacher certificate in International TESOL. We know that this course will do one thing, and that will be it will make you a better teacher. No question. What we have done over the years is we have distilled the techniques, the methods that we use as teachers, and remember, we are a teacher training company. That's what we do. We have trained thousands and thousands of teachers in how to be better teachers. And in this course, you will be one of them. And at the end of it, you will get a lovely certificate, which will be of great value to you as a teacher. Also remember that when you're doing this course, you will think carefully about your own preparation for the video that you will make that will demonstrate your techniques. Now, this will be tremendous for you as a teacher. What we're going to do with that is we're going to prepare a lesson. We are going to use the inputs from this course. We are going to use the techniques that you developed for you to make a little video, not complicated. Your camera, your phone on the side of the class, looking at you and the students, and a reasonable audio, a reasonable visual, and you will demonstrate in that how much you have learned. It doesn't have to be everything, but what we're going to do is we're going to make you a better teacher. And what you are going to do is pay careful attention to the videos and the quizzes and look at the assessment criteria for the videos, and in doing that you're going to be a better teacher. So let's look at the first thing that we're going to talk about today. And today we're going to talk about objectives. And as a teacher, you're going to teach your learners something in a lesson. You're going to get them to do things. And the big benefit is if they know what those things are. Also really good if you know what they are. So at the beginning of the lesson, you tell them, today we are going to learn reading, or today we're going to learn speaking. We're going to get better at talking to our partner. We are going to get better at singing songs in English. We are going to get better at writing, etc., etc. So at this part of your lesson, you're telling your students what you're going to do, and they are learning what they're going to do. We know that we want them to know what they are going to do, what they are going to learn, and that is great. And we can be very clear on that. Today we're going to improve our reading skills. We are going to learn vocabulary for animals and a whole number of things that we have in our objectives. And those are very, very important. They're particularly important because in the middle of the lesson and at the end of the lesson, you want to check that they know what they have learned. So when you start, today we are going to learn, for example, the vocabulary of animals. Then you need to stop in the middle of the lesson and say, okay, now tell your partner what you have learned. Sound okay? What is absolute best is at the end of the lesson when they go home and mum says to them or dad says to them, what did you learn today? They have an answer. Because most frequently kids anywhere in the world, students in the world, they go home and mum says or dad says to them, what did you learn today? And they go, nothing. No, nothing. Yeah, which is of course not true, but you want to raise their awareness of what it is they have learned so that they can log that away. They can give careful attention to putting in a little box in their brain what they learned today, creates better opportunity to review and to think about that, and of course report it to mum and dad. If you go back to the beginning of this video, when I talked about what we were going to do as teachers and what we were going to learn and what we were going to achieve, you felt that things were clearer. You had a motivation, you had a direction. Your brain was organizing what you were learning in relation to that goal. And it's exactly the same for your students. So if they know what they're going to learn, then they're mentally prepared for the learning. They can start organizing their learning objectives in their little heads, and they will be more motivated and more adjusted to what you want to achieve in the classroom. What we will talk about on a number of occasions on this course is the importance of using language, because we know that language acquisition is driven by use, is driven by interaction. And as teachers, we know that, but sometimes there's a small difference between what we know and what we do. So in the classroom, we know we want our students to talk to one another, but how? Yeah. And the simple solution to that is at the beginning of the lesson, set up partner groups. Now you can have some of the partnering that we look at a little bit later in the course. That's if you have a large classroom, or if you have small groups, then you can identify your students by their group. Yeah, so you could have children in the apple group, the banana group, the strawberry group. Yeah, or you could have students in the circle group, the square group, the triangle group, whatever. But students at the beginning of the lesson need to know who their partners are, so your life as a teacher is easier. So you can say to your students, okay, work with your fruit partner and talk about your family. 1, 2, 3, go. So simply to do what we need to do, which is generate interaction, to generate language use in the classroom, set up partner groups at the beginning of the class. Always good in a classroom to start as you mean to continue. And we know as teachers that if you start a class where you stand at the front and you talk, in a very interesting way, of course, but if you talk and talk and talk, and maybe you do some activities and you ask a few questions, maybe you show some flashcards, you know, you do a number of things, but it's basically you doing the talking. What happens is that when you set a task, which is for them to talk to their partner, they don't, yeah, or they're quiet, they're silent, they're not sure, they're hesitant. And that's because you have defined at the beginning the nature and the style of the learning. So start as you mean to continue at the beginning of the class, and you can think about something that your students like. You can think about something that's part of your syllabus. You can think about something that you want to review. But remember that your main objective here is to develop communication skills and set the tone of the classroom where students willingly and actively interact with one another. So at the beginning of the class, you could say something like, turn to your fruit partner, or turn to your number 2 partner, or whatever partnering system you've got, and talk about 2 things you ate this morning. Talk about 2 things you're going to do next week. Talk about 3 things you did yesterday. And of course, you can choose your topic according to your needs. And just bear in mind that the objective is communication. So make it normal and natural conversation. If you like, you can start by modeling that with one student so they know what to do. So in your lessons, start as you mean to continue. We are told that variety is the spice of life. And for our students, they also know that life needs a little bit of spice. And when we're teaching them and they've got to learn language, and in that learning they must have repetition, they must repeat the target language to achieve fluency in it. And we'll look at this more later in the course when we look at learning and acquisition in the classroom. But our learners need to repeat things. How do you make it interesting? You make it interesting by a little bit of variety in the interaction. Very simple, really. You can, depending on your kids or depending on your students, you can do things like, okay, you've done that, good. Now stand up and walk slowly around the classroom and repeat that with your partner. For example, walk slowly around the classroom and say that slowly with your partner. Walk quickly around the classroom and say it quickly with your partner. Walk quietly around the classroom and say it quietly. So there's many variations on that, but what you're doing, of course, is you're making life interesting for your learners. You're making the communication different, a little bit entertaining, and you're achieving the repetition that's necessary for developing fluency in language. A little more interesting. The task that we've got as teachers is that we need to make the communication interesting enough for our learners to engage in it. We know that language learning sometimes is not really very much fun. There's a lot of memorization, there's a lot of practice. And while we're doing that, if we can also get our learners to feel what they might feel when they're at home using their mother tongue, then that's a really good step towards learning. So a little bit of fun, a little bit of engagement will help the desire, will help the memory, will help the language use. So simple one that you can use, and which is a time-honored one pretty much. I think it may have originated in China, where you do scissors, paper, rock, or whatever the order is, and kids do that, and of course the winner has a particular role, the loser has another role. It's a little break. It only takes, 10 seconds, sometimes a little bit more. The kids do it, it's fun, there's a little bit of extra chatter, and then they get down to the task. So really, really nice thing to do. You can do other variations on that, which is do rock, paper, scissors, or scissor, paper, rock, or whatever. I always get it wrong. And the winner answers the questions, the loser asks them. So anything that will generate some greater sense of involvement, some greater sense of ownership. Because if you have a little competition, if you have a little gamble, if you like, and you win or lose, you're a little bit more invested in what you need to do. So role deciders using scissors, paper, rock is a really nice way of adding engagement to the learning. So there are a number of different ways to create that sense of excitement or a little bit of spice when you're doing a task. Another one is just to get the learners to compare things with one another. So they can do things like compare how long their hair is, or how big their hands are, or who's got the neatest book, anything. Yeah. And they do that, and then you have someone who's a winner, if you like, and someone who's a loser. So the person with the neatest book could answer the questions. The person with the longer hair might ask the questions. Entirely up to you. But if you can do that sort of thing where the learners engage a little bit with one another, have a little bit of normal everyday conversation, then you can use that energy, you can use that desire to help you make your classroom tasks more interesting. I thought it would be nice to add here just another example that you can use, a simple one, and it will be talking about birthdays. People like to do that sort of thing. You might say, okay, talk with your partner about your birthday, when you last had a birthday and what you did, and they do that, and then you say, okay, stop. Now, just talk with your partner again. Who is older? Decide who is older. The older person will do this, the younger person will do this. So you could do that. Once again, a really nice way of taking natural conversation, natural interest, and moving that into a focus on a classroom task. Imagine that someone comes up to you and says, "Hi, how are you today?" And you go, "Oh, not so bad, really, all considered." And then when you've done that, then they say to you, "Hi, how are you today?" You go, "Oh, strange." This is what we get kids to do in class all the time, and that's repeat things. We need them to repeat things in order to learn, but we get them to repeat them with the same person. And they get a feeling fairly quickly that something is not quite right, that the communication is not valued, that really they're just going through a form. But if you change that, if you give them different partners, yeah, then it's perfectly normal. Yeah, so this is a really cool way of getting the level of repetition that you need, but doing it with different partners. In the course of your normal day, maybe a whole number of people will say, "Hi, how you going, how you doing, whatever," and you'll respond to them. You won't worry about that because it's a normal thing to have the same task with different partners. You can do that with kids. Later in the course, we'll look at a particular interaction pattern called a conveyor belt, which is really, really good for this in terms of developing both fluency and accuracy in language. We have all done it. We have stood at the front of the class, or if we are careful teachers, we will occasionally stand at the side of the class or at the back or somewhere different. So we change the dynamic, and there are other students who we will be physically closer to, but we stand somewhere and we give instructions. And we give them and we are very confident. Yes, we know what those instructions are. We know what we want our students to do, and then we watch and we watch and we wait as all the students look at one another and try and figure out what it is we wanted them to do. Yeah. Now, that's kind of normal because the teacher's instructions are not clear and they're not checked. If you want to get maximum output in your class, you want to get maximum efficiency, and you want really good classroom management, make sure your instructions are simple, they're clear, and they're checked. Now we'll look at that in more detail in one of the inputs on young learners, but just for the moment, remember that if you want to reduce your classroom management issues, if you want to reduce the time that you spend around checking that the kids are doing the task that you want them to do, make sure your instructions are simple, clear, and checked. One of the reasons why I think we have survived is we are very aware of movement. And I don't mean survive in the classroom, I mean survive as a species. And that is, we pay a lot of attention to things that move. We pay a lot of attention to things that move because one, we might be able to eat them, or two, they might want to eat us. So we're carefully attuned to things that move. And in the classroom, if we move, our kids, our students will give us more attention. If we're expressing things and we're using body language, they will pay more attention and get more meaning. So if, for example, I wanted 2 students to stand up, I could say, please, 2 students at the front stand up, or I could say, please, 2 students at the front stand up. It's a lot clearer. If I wanted to say, okay, I want you 4 students to make a circle, this becomes clearer with the addition of body language. So not only will it save you going to the gym, yeah, not only will it make your body physically healthier, but it will also make your students more interested if you walk around more in the classroom, and when you're expressing yourself, use your body. You can use your face, obviously. You can use your hands, use your legs, sorry, use your arms, use your legs, move around, use your body to create meaning, because in that meaning with your body, we have language and we have engagement for your students. It's very tempting to appear good, to appear very, very good, because we can ask questions and we always get the right answer because we ask the bright girl or the bright boy somewhere in the front. We feel good and we can go on to the next question, but really this is not very good teaching. Yeah, it's much better if when we ask a question, we've got our learners trained to wait till we get to the end of the question before they can answer. So for example, imagine we have a question, and that question is, what does a cowboy look like? Yeah. If we just have that as a normal question, then the bright boy at the front would put his hand up and say, he wears a hat and he rides a horse and he chases cows. Yeah, and then we go, I'm very good. Yeah. Alternatively, we go, what does a cowboy look like? Everyone. And then everyone can call out their answer, and that's absolutely fine, because your students know that they need to wait till you get to the end of the question. Yeah, that means in the break between the question and the naming, because it could be everyone or it could be a name of a person like Adam. Yeah, so you can ask the question, wait, and then name. When you wait, it means that everyone thinks about the answer, not just the clever kids at the front. Everyone thinks about the answer. So your students know that you're going to ask a question. They need to wait before you get to the end, and then they can answer. So you've got 2 options. One is, what does a cowboy look like? Everyone, and everyone answers. Or what does a cowboy look like? Adam, and then Adam answers. Yeah, so here you get control over the level of response, which students are responding, and you can be selective. You can choose students who you think might or might not know the answer. Yeah, probably best if when you ask a question like this, if you think it's difficult, you give them an opportunity to check in partners first, and then everyone feels confident in their answer. So remembering that when you ask questions, train your learners to wait till you get to the end of the question. So what does a cowboy look like? Everyone, and then everyone can call out their answer. Or what does a cowboy look like? And then you can name a student, and then that student can give you the answer. One of our roles as a teacher is to ask the questions. And we ask questions for all sorts of good reasons. We want to make sure that the learners understand. We want to build engagement. We want to build communication. All very, very important. If we can reverse that, we can improve our learners' language skills, and we can also be a model for them of the kinds of answers that they get to questions. So after you've taught a question structure, get your learners to ask you. Yeah, and then you can give a fairly well developed reply, maybe one that you've thought about, but in that reply what you're doing is modeling the kinds of answers that they might be able to give with one another. And if you encourage your learners to ask you questions in class, of course, they are going to ask after class, but if they ask you questions in class, it's a good way to build up the balance in the relationship and a really good way for you to model the answers that you're giving. So in this last technique for this section of the training, technique number 10, which is reverse, you're reversing the normal order in the classroom, which is you encourage the learners to ask you questions so that when you give answers, you're also providing really good models of language use.